Good evening. My name is Clover Archer. I am the director of Stanier Gallery here in the Department of Art and Art History. And I want to begin by acknowledging that Washington and Lee University exists on the traditional homelands of the Yesa, whose descendants are the Monacan, Holly-Wasaponi, Occaneechi, and other Tutelo-speaking peoples. On behalf of Stanier Gallery and the Roger Mudd Center for Ethics, I'm delighted to welcome you all to tonight's event celebrating the Daily Ethics Mosaic, a community artwork, which is on view in Lakes Atrium. This collaborative project between Stanier Gallery and the Mudd Center is part of the Mudd Center's 2021-22 program of events exploring the theme Daily Ethics, how individual choices and habits express our values and shape our world. The Mosaic is a collective effort made up of artworks generated by WNL students, staff, and faculty in a series of workshops that took place in the fall term. In these sessions, which were led by tonight's speaker, a Richmond-based artist, Jonathan Lee, participants were invited to explore the Mudd Center theme through individual and collective art making. One of the goals with this project was to provide opportunities for our community to come together in person after a year of COVID-related isolation, to reflect upon and discuss compelling ethical questions in a creative context. Over 200 participants contributed artworks to create the Mosaic, which is a unique portrait of our community at this unprecedented historical moment. So before I introduce our speaker, I want to take a moment to express my appreciation to those who contributed time, energy, and resources to make this endeavor a success. Carol Bryant, Christine Carr, Arden Floyd, Dave Pfaff, Kate Sacchi, and the Department of Physics and Engineering, who loaned us the telescope that's in the atrium so you can view the details higher up in the piece. I also want to acknowledge Roger Mudd for his generosity in establishing the Mudd Center for Ethics. And finally, I especially want to thank Carla Murdoch, the director of the Mudd Center, for conceiving of such a meaningful collaboration and for being such a super stellar partner throughout. And now it is my great pleasure to introduce Jonathan Lee. Jonathan has his Master's of Library and Information Science from Wayne State University and his Bachelor of Arts from Virginia Commonwealth University. His creative practice is often informed by his work as a librarian. For example, Jonathan's workshop and exhibition series, Curriculum Lab, takes an arts-integrated approach to exploring visual and information literacy. Curriculum Lab workshops and exhibitions were held at art venues in Richmond and also at Roanoke College, where Jonathan was a visiting artist. In another socially engaged project carried out while a visiting artist at the University of Richmond, Jonathan led the Who is Downtown project, a community-generated representation of individuals who live, work, and play in downtown Richmond. Jonathan's artwork has been the subject of solo exhibitions at Art Space Gallery in Richmond, Falk Gallery at Christopher Newport News University in Newport News, and Fenwick Gallery at George Mason University in Fairfax. He has also participated in numerous group shows, most recently Homeward Bound at the Taubman Museum in Roanoke, and Wabash Valley exhibition at Swope Art Museum in Terre Haute, Indiana. Jonathan's work can be found in private and public art collections, including Capital One, George Mason University Special Collections, Harnett Museum of Art, Roanoke College, and Virginia Commonwealth University. So if we have time at the conclusion of Jonathan's remarks, he will take some questions, but we do have to vacate the hall by 6:30 for another event. So if we don't have time for some questions, please, we can continue the conversation at the reception in the atrium, where I hope you'll join us after the talk. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Jonathan.
Thank you so much for coming tonight. My name is Jonathan Lee. As said, I'm an artist, librarian, and instructor based out of Richmond, Virginia. So I make artwork out of used materials. Library discard, album covers, books, various types of ephemera. Sometimes sketches and scraps of my own making, but mostly things that I've collected from institutions, shops, individuals. These materials that I use are charged by the exchanges and interactions of almost unknown consequence. Yet they still have the power to reveal things about our past, present, and future, not just because of what they are, but who we are. By altering their original form and function, I'm investigating how information is created, interpreted, and renewed through individuals, communities, and systems. Basically, I'm interested in time and relationships. So, this is Looking for Answers Concealed with Elegant Diction. It's my piece that's currently up at the Taubman Museum in Roanoke. It's a diptych that explores the relationships that we have with information and the institutions that organize and preserve it. So the materials used were all discarded from VCU's Cabell Library, and the title merges two quotes from the namesake author, James Branch Cabell. I worked at the library for 8 years, during which I helped do an overhaul of the entire collection. So I had unusual access to these materials and a lot personally invested in them. A great thing to make work from. On the left, you'll see 1,000 weak hand drawings on due date slips. They're each cut out individually, overlapped, transforming personal interactions into a community portrait. So each date, every single mark, including my own, are the potential of the start of an idea in bloom. Everything moving together, again, going from that individual to communal aspect. That is balanced by the right, where you see the materials themselves, organized in space, end papers, due date slips, card pockets, adhesive, all bearing the marks of use and age. Together they visualize our knowledge passing through time and place. A great portrait of the inner workings of a library and a community that uses it. So for me, making art is a part of a creative impulse, as well as part inquiry and part therapy. When I'm in the studio, I'm always engaging in at least two conversations. One is with myself. What am I thinking and feeling? What am I working through personally? What type of interests have been piqued recently by different interactions? And then the other is with the materials themselves. What are they doing and saying? How are they reacting to me interacting with them? What little, tiny tidbits can I follow somewhere and explore further? So where these dialogues overlap is where my work takes form. Each piece becomes a collection of personal and communal experiences, the product of following small details into unexpected places. So, to give you an example of the type of rabbit holes that I go down in the studio, this piece was made from old album covers. When you gather things like, say, used materials, you end up seeing a lot of the same things over and over again. This piece, titled Barrier, is made of many copies of the same LP. Oddly enough, this is the LP. I guess Barry Manilow was very popular a long time ago and is extremely not popular now. I find him in the dumpster all the time. So, what really, at first I didn't purposefully collect this LP over and over again. I just kept on showing up. And so much so that I wondered if I could make something just with that. So, didn't intend to collect, kept on bumping into, what am I going to do with it? The variations in color are what really drew me into the idea. It comes not just from age, but from the variety of regional pressings sold around the world throughout the 80s. So different printers are going to use different inks, different countries are going to have different machinery, etc. And that's where you're getting all this variation. The image of corrugated steel conjured up thoughts of borders, labors, barriers. And so that seemed extremely relevant to a lot of the issues that we're dealing with today. So the work itself ended up being about the similarities and differences that we often ignore when speaking about immigrants and refugees, people that cross borders, not just products, but the products created by that labor, by those people, and how those immigrants and refugees both strengthen us as a whole and add variety to our world. So the studio, in general, is where I solve problems of my own design while thinking about actual problems out in the world. I create narratives, find new perspectives, and present the results as an opportunity to consider things differently. But sometimes it's not as interesting to do that on my own, and that's where my social practice comes in. Unlike my studio practice, which centers exclusively around my interests, choices, and control, my social practice is dependent on and enriched by the involvement of others. It's a way for me to engage in the world, to get out of the isolation of the studio, and to interact with other people's impulses and ideas that creatives share. Originally, my social practice was just a product of necessity. The need to do academic research that wasn't boring, and to make cross-disciplinary and multimodal exercises for the classroom that I could apply. So now, after doing it over the years, it has become an extension of the work that I do in all of my professions. My mission as a lead artist in a social practice environment is to provide a flexible and sound framework on which both individual and group experiences can form. Participants can then apply their own unique imagination and point of view to the questions that I pose, both individually and in groups. I think that's extremely important to do both, through discussion and art making. Those collaborations and conversations are the thing that end up making the work possible. So that leads us to the Daily Ethics Mosaic. How did we get here? I'm going to do my best to walk through the very complicated, long process that we had, but I think it really turned out wonderful, and I had some really great collaborators to do it with. In late May of last year, Clover reached out to me to see if I'd like to design a program in conjunction with the Mudd Center's lecture series. Clover and Carla wanted to bring an artist in to guide students, faculty, and staff, art inclined or not, in a creative endeavor that would culminate in an exhibition and respond to that theme: daily ethics, how individual choices and habits express our values and shape our world. By mid-June, I had an overview of the workshop, which kept on being edited and fine-tuned on into August, and really with every workshop that we did. I did a test run with some of my colleagues back in Richmond to see what was and wasn't working. Important to make sure that you've done it with other people before you bring it into the greater world. And then the fall semester began, and we were off and running. So here's what we came up with. Do a series of 2-hour workshops. In that 2 hours, we did a lot. First, you'd think about the theme, then you would apply those thoughts individually to an 8-inch square. You had 30 minutes to fill that square, however best that you could, and it didn't have to be a precious item, didn't have to be a great work of art, just a visualization of the things that you were thinking and feeling in relation to the theme. So after that, you would take it back to a photo station, document it. And then on a card, write down some of your thoughts about the making of the piece, the meaning behind it. Turn that in, come back, and then you would be randomly put into a group of 4 and have to take your 4 8-inch squares, chop them up, move them around, and make a new 16-inch square together, a collective mosaic. And by doing so, you're basically taking your own feelings, sharing them with a small group, coming up with a compromise of how those can be unified, make that new piece. Since shaping our world is both an individual and collective enterprise, the group's merging works is a shared vision and an act of compromise. So we're combining the work, discussing, cutting, rearranging, making that new 16-inch square. Then that is in turn photographed, documented, and then each of those 16-inch squares would be combined to make the final piece. With such a limited time and such an expansive theme, I felt it was extremely important to include a workbook ahead of time to provide space for introspection and preparation. We decided to explore the theme through the lens of the last 18 months specifically. What personal values are most important to us? How are these values expressed in our daily lives? And how have they changed over the course of the last 18 months? How can we envision actualizing our values through individual and collective actions? And how can we manifest that through this project? These questions in the workbook, they move from past, present, to future. The ideas and exercises within the workshop or the workbook, they get more complex as we move forward, build on one another. They also end up trying to get people to think visually about those ideas, starting, again, very simply and getting more complicated, going from color to shape to pattern to image. By going through all this work ahead of time, people are able to not only process the theme and their feelings, but also kind of think about how they want to visualize that. It's really hard, just in general, to visualize anything. So without providing that time for introspection, I don't think we would get as solid a work. And we really did get incredible work in these workshops. The questions and work done here are the foundation for everything created and collected. And it makes the actual portraiture, the time capsule kind of aspect of this project very alive and real. So the discussions and experiences of each participant is the core of the work, a shared creative act. The individual, though, is hidden in the complexity of the whole, but can be revealed through inquiry. Every single thing has been documented from every stage, from start to finish. Everyone's contribution is valued. Everything is, a part of the greater discussion being had. It's a transparent public work. Even those who didn't participate can access the full narrative to draw conclusions from. Everything is documented, preserved, coming to show the big picture of the opinions of this community during this very particular time in history. So once everything was completed, I needed to put everything together in a visually appealing way. This is where I kind of get to push my creative impulses more directly onto the work. After the workshops that we did in August, September, and October, we ended up with 54 combined 16-inch squares, about 216 individual 8-inch squares, And that all had to come together. And it was a whole lot, very chaotic to say the least. We knew we wanted to cover at least 12 feet squared across the atrium wall. So we decided to, in addition, print the photos of the documentation that we had made of the individual pieces and incorporate them into the larger piece. Together, everything makes a 14-foot square that serves as that community portrait that I was talking about. So I had to do all of this virtually. I'm glad that we had the photos because it made it a lot easier to kind of figure out that layout, to see where everything was going. First of all, I went through all the different files, separated between unified pieces and individual pieces. Within those two categories, I would think, all right, what are the colors that are showing up? What are the dominant colors in these pieces? Organize them by color. All right, now that I've got them organized by color, what kind of content is popping up? Not just what it's about, but also the shapes and images and such that are in the work. Organize all those into different folders. Separate everything. Then thinking about how I wanted to incorporate the individual pieces. And that's where this frame comes. These are all of the individual pieces, unincorporated into others, but still a part of the greater whole. So kind of bordered all of this out, leaving enough space for exactly 54 unified pieces. A little detail that I'd like to share is towards the middle, underneath the two exposed areas. Those are the 4 contributions from Carla and Clover, kind of thinking about them as holding up the rest of the project, as being our foundation. So they're hidden right there, a little detail in plain sight. Then, after figuring out what the border was going to be, the area, I went to the center. So this is the very center of the piece. I kind of wanted to pull in a couple of things that were particularly strong or were made in a very particular way. So 2 of our combinations, 2 of our mosaics, were framing out a piece. They didn't want to cut the one piece, they cut the other 3, framed that out. So that's our circle and our X. We've also got hearts on either side. And I'm kind of thinking of it as the heart of the piece, and in hearing everyone's interactions with the prompts, with making the work, with what they were experiencing. There was a lot of leaning towards or wanting for love, emotion, human interaction, the things that are either getting us through it or the things that we really miss, right? So that is the heart of the work. Then, we had a class come in and use a lot of natural elements. So flanking the center are 4 pieces that have leaves incorporated in 3D elements, things that kind of bring us back to nature, another theme that ended up going through a lot of this work. There's also various other 3D elements already built in. So for the majority of the work, it's very flat, but for like 8 or so of them, there are extra 3D elements within those combinations. So making sure that those 3D elements are balanced towards the center, and then that they reflect one another as well. The circle up there kind of reflects the flower at the bottom, the 2 hearts on either side, the circles that move across the middle. These are all important elements to kind of bring things together. So now that I had a framework, I had a core, I had to figure out how the rest worked. So Then I digitally broke the space up into quarters, and just moved those files around. Again, thinking about, all right, I've got 13 green squares. How am I going to move that green around in a way that works for the entirety of the piece? I've got 20 circles or whatever. How can I make sure that those circles are moving your eye across the entire space, not clustered in one spot? There was plenty of edits, plenty of changes. I tried to get the same types of elements and shapes, colors, and themes in each quarter. Then, once I had moved everything, it all comes together, becomes the template for our work. Then we end up with this final piece. Honestly, when you put it all together in a computer and you haven't been interacting with the materials while you're doing that building, in some ways it makes it easier to visualize, but you also have no idea how it's really going to fit. And as I'm sure you've seen, the installation that we've done, I'm extremely proud of. I think is extremely effective. I couldn't be happier with the outcomes that we've come up with. My hope is that this piece will be a catalyst for more conversations and more investigations. I think I have not been able to go through all of the workbooks that we were given, all of the different feedback cards that we've had. There's so much extra data there that'll be at this university's disposal for forever. And I think it is an extremely interesting portrait of this very interesting and important time that we're living in. And it's very focused in this community and doesn't lean in one direction or the other, involving faculty, students, staff, and trying to invite the entire community to come in, make this work together, to have these experiences, to work through things. A lot of people said it was like therapy, where we introduced all sorts of psychological, sociological, artistic ideas that were enriched by the interactions that we had with one another and that introspection that we spent, that extra time that we were given to kind of explore these ideas. So I just blasted right through that, as I thought I might. Which is very funny, because I was like, I don't want to include too much of my, the stories about the various, art-making practices and stuff that I have, because I'm sure everyone just wants to really hear about this project. But I think we've got plenty of time, do we not? So I can talk more, I can answer questions. I am so thrilled that you're here, and yeah.
What are some of the things that surprised you?
A lot of it. That's the greatest thing about, a social practice, is that you have to relinquish control and not know, and that nothing can be known until it's actually completed. Even going from the first couple of workshops that we had, as we fine-tune and get better and you move along and you kind of pick up on themes, and it keeps on building. And so every single time that I return to this campus, I would be thinking in the back of my head, got this figured out, know, kind of what to expect. And there would always be some new idea, some very personal reaction, some really cool, communal things happening. So it was always surprising. Seeing how other people work through visualizing ideas is fascinating to me, especially because I have such a particular way of doing things. Seeing how other people are working through solving the problem that I've created, seeing what those results are and what inspired those things. For instance, You'd get a group together, and I would say, all right, everyone, introduce yourself, and then say a word or two about your individual piece, and then as a group, let's talk about, what are the differences, what are the similarities, where are those overlaps, and how can our collective experiences inspire the way that we're going to cut this piece up. Seeing how different groups came to those conclusions together was always interesting. In fact, I wish that part was a little better documented, but it's hard to do on the fly. I'm rambling now. but yeah, I really think, let's see. The fact that there's such playful variety, you hope for it, but you never quite know until you get in there and seeing it and doing the work. The fact that people put so much of themselves into this project is, part of the reason that it was so successful. The fact that this community was so open to embracing these ideas and to getting out of their comfort zones and working on, a creative project that, is almost just a thought experiment. But the fact that people got so much out of it was extremely rewarding. Mm-hmm.
Were there particular themes that sort of resonated in ways that you felt some strong themes coming out in the greater context? For instance, I see hope up there, but I also see, maybe some images that are darker. And I wonder, were there any particular things that came out that struck you that you didn't expect?
I expected to have a combination of positive and negative reactions. I was maybe not surprised, but interested by the variety, the gray area between those two. There was a lot of, I thought, for a lot of people who aren't necessarily art inclined, it's really hard to visualize something complex, right? You think, I'm not very good at, making art. I'm not much of a drawer. I only have 30 minutes. How am I going to convey some complex ideas? But it's blown away over and over again about people really getting into the dynamics of ethics over time. Where was I? Where am I going? Where do I want to be? And even if it wasn't all wrapped up into their single piece, it was often in the group. For instance, the piece with the X towards the middle, the framed out one, that group had one negative square and 3 positive squares. So they decided, hey, let's frame out that negativity with positivity. Let's surround it, squeeze it, turn it into something positive. Things like that, come out of that group dynamic and kind of challenge our perception of maybe, we're in a negative place as far as our thoughts were going because it's been a really tough last couple of years, but then we hear about, other people kind of taking that as a way to transform their lives and move things forward, and having those conversations then, move the conversation forward for everyone. The way that, again, asking people to cut up things, rearrange them, move without losing any surface area. That was extremely important to me, right? So everything's being fully documented, nothing is lost. Every single square inch of everything that everyone has done for this project is represented. But that's a challenge, and it was definitely some things stuck better than others, some things cut better than others. You're on the fly trying to make that mosaic work, to work, through that as a group. But seeing the way that, not just an individual in that group kind of took over, but that the group together would be really making those decisions. Like, that should go here, or, you'll see let's see, 2 over from the circle, you've got the waves, having a group be like, we're all riding this terrible wave over the last, 18 months. It's been negative, positive, and we want to kind of reflect that in the work that we're, like, that's the thing that came out of our group discussion, so we want to reflect that in the work. Things like that, I think, were, extremely important and interesting.
Thank you very much for leading this project. I enjoyed the design made, and I'm stunned with the outcome. My question is related to patterns. I drew a butterfly, and I saw that several people also made butterflies. Do you see patterns?
Yeah, part of it comes from the materials that we provide. I mean, the same materials were available to every single workshop, and those materials were limited on purpose. We can't have endless possibilities when you have 30 minutes to try and make, a piece of work. I had a collection of stamps that we used, and there were definitely butterflies and such in that. But like your piece, where you actually drew your butterfly, there were a couple other pieces that did that as well. And, some of those repetitions, like, really kind of came up, and they were, it's a handful of people drawing actual COVID. Like, yeah, obviously, we're dealing with this situation, so, all the way over there in the corner, there's a COVID. Or there were a couple of clocks, like, linear time has been completely eroded by the last 2 years. So thinking about time in an interesting way, so that kept on coming up. Actual patterns, like, I'm not much of an artist, but I can do a pattern of something, or I can do various colors, I can move things around, like, so I'm going to utilize the space in that way. A lot of collage. Collage is an incredible tool for quickly and accurately presenting ideas, especially, for the non-art inclined. But I mean, I'm a collage artist myself. I find, using other materials to get to the point that I'm trying to make is helpful. And, I specifically pulled magazines that were Virginia related and within the last 2 years. So the actual images and stuff could be directly applied to the themes that we were already dealing with and the space, the state that we're in. There are a couple hearts, there are a couple flags, there's, some food elements, some family, some words, like there was a lot of focus on, big words that, kind of summarize what people were feeling or experiencing. And then, having like a specific class come in, bring their materials from their lives and from nature and, impose that on this project. That obviously created the same type of, themes coming up. In general, I think, it was probably more positive reactions than negative, and more outward facing as far as time goes than inward. There wasn't a lot of nostalgia in these works from my perspective, which I think is great, right? Like, we wanted people to think about their past, present, and future, not just to harp on that past experience. I mean, part of this project is trying to, shed some of that weight that we have on ourselves and to kind of think about the things that we want to actualize in our lives and in our communities.
One more question?
Okay, one more.
If you were to do this social practice with a group of people again, is there a certain theme willing to get around?
Obviously, I really like, projects that go from that individual to small group to large group, to think about those relationships that we have. I mean, even in my, solo practice, I'm trying to make pieces in response to not just my feelings that I'm having at that time, but the things that are already embedded in the experiences that other people had had with those objects. So, when I think of ideal social practice interactions, I think, do I have a good theme, whatever that theme is? I know I'm copping out on giving you a theme, but, is there an interesting theme to interact with? More importantly, is there like a community that wants this, that, is willing to have these conversations, is willing to get in there and make the work? And then what's the purpose of doing that work? We don't want it just to be, another arts workshop where, everyone learns how to make a collage or something. Nothing wrong with that, but I'm trying to engage in larger ideas. So, are there materials? Are there themes? Are there, problems that this community wants to interact with, work through, and then make work out of? That's kind of the catalyst of the things that I'm interested in social practice. That and, again, that overlap of my various professional, interests. There's an instruction element. There's a research element. There's a data gathering element. There's an art making element. There's, an end result, an exhibition, and a piece that is more than artwork. Every single social practice project that I've done ends up also having that ephemera, those, workbooks or sketchbooks or notes or, different elements of how people went from point A to point B. And then giving all of that to the audience, the rest of the community that didn't necessarily participate, and letting them have access to that so then they can fully interact with all of that information and think about those themes in a complex way. Did I kind of answer that? I'm happy to answer any questions out there too. Thank you so much. And please feel free to reach out at any time. Oh, good. I got sweaty hand nervous for a little while. That's what I was really hoping for. I was like, I kind of know what I want to say, but I feel like I could blast through it and that would get people to talk to me.